Alright, hello everybody, and welcome back to episode 2 of the Custom Hearthstone Community Podcast. So this week we are going to be talking about user-created keywords, as well as taking a look at the recently revealed magnetic keyword from the Boomsday project. We've listened to a lot of the feedback on podcast 1, and we're ready to bring the show back with even higher quality. So, once again, I am Birb.
I'm Maysick.
And I'm Scorpiosis.
And just a quick review of episode 1 feedback. Thank you guys for all the feedback. It was amazing. Especially huge shout out to Reddit user Kayek for a super detailed review of criticisms, suggestions, stuff like that. He even made like mock-ups, and we're definitely going to start implementing those features slowly as we go through more episodes. So yeah, thanks. And without further ado, the first custom keyword we have is Conjure by Reddit user G4BZEXE. And the first card we have to showcase this mechanic is Hateful Prisoner, which is a 7-mana, 2/7 rare neutral dragon that says Conjure Fireball. And so what this mechanic does is instead of attacking, it casts a spell on the target. So generally, the minion will attack as normal, except it won't take damage. But it follows all attacking rules, like it can't pass through taunt, and it triggers secrets. And the spell follows some rules. So for example, it won't trigger Gadgets and Auctioneer, but it will count from spell damage. And so this is essentially 7-mana, 2/7 on your opponent's turn, and on your turn, it's like immune while attacking, and it deals 6 damage to targets instead of 2.
Yeah, I think definitely one of the key points about this mechanic that has a huge impact on whether or not it really works is the fact that essentially every single minion that has Conjure automatically also has immune while attacking. And immune while attacking is a very scary and inherently snowballing mechanic, so that's definitely a concern I have immediately looking at this mechanic.
I do like, however, though, it does have the immune while attacking problem. The attack is always going to be naturally lower to account for the value of the spell, so it balances out kind of on the other end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's going to be easier to trade. Like, normally immune while attacking is especially dangerous on high attack minions, but you can kind of create like an interesting sort of difference between the two attack values with this Conjure mechanic. The thing that really strikes me as unfortunate about this mechanic is that you're really limited in the type of spells you can use. It kind of has to be direct damage spells like every single time. So in this case, it's just Fireball, which is just deal 6 damage. So
yeah, and sort of another problem with the Conjure mechanic in general. It's similar to a lot of the fan-made mechanics that revolve around something along the lines of do something instead of attacking. And the issue is that the minion must always live through the turn to do anything interesting, and Hearthstone's a game where a lot of like high value minions don't live through the turn. In the case where this does live through the turn, it's super snowbally, so I'm really concerned about like the snowballiness of this mechanic.
Yeah, I agree. Another thing which is a bit unfortunate, which Hearthstone kind of runs into a lot, is its limited UI, and Fireball of course is a basic spell, so I think it's fine on this card, but for more complex spells, and there are some fairly complex direct damage spells you can use with this effect, it's up to the user to know what that spell does. You could like maybe mouse over it and have the spell show next to it, but just from a current perspective of the UI, it would not really work very well.
Bringing it back to Hateful Prisoner in particular as a card, I have to say though, the idea of it's sort of a dragon that shoots fireballs as it attacks, like that is definitely an inherently interesting idea to explore. And I think that like Conjure Fireball is a very nice like intro level, like here's a very simple Conjure card that is comparable to other cards.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the cards you'd want to show as your first keyword card. Like for Echo, they used Phantom Militia, which is a very simple card. You know, Echo Taunt gets the point across without becoming overly complicated.
Yeah, I think the presentation, aesthetics, flavor on this card is very on point. I'm more worried about the Conjure mechanic as a whole, and so to look at a more complex Conjure card, we have, by the same user of course, Vile Defiler, which is a 3-mana 1/4 Warlock Epic card. It has spell damage +1 and Conjure Mortal Coil. So it's important to note that the spell damage will trigger on the Mortal Coil, as well as your other spells, of course.
You'd think it cast Defile because of the name, but it doesn't.
Yeah, it's a shame. Although I think Conjure Defile would be kind of insane.
Yeah, that'd be a bit weird.
As for the card itself, yeah, I in a similar way to how Hateful Prisoner was a good like entry level Conjure card, I think this is a good sort of like more complicated Conjure card that plays off the fact that, as specified by the creator, Conjure does indeed scale with spell damage. Again, I think the card is potentially very interesting. Like, you give a 2 damage Mortal Coil instead of attacking. That can potentially draw you a card if you kill a minion. But again, the issue is just that like this card doesn't do anything interesting unless it lives through the turn. But if it does live through the turn, it becomes this 2 damage card draw cannon that can be really hard to shut down. So it's kind of worrying from a balance perspective.
Yeah, and aside from that, like, even though it's really cool to see, like, Conjure Mortal Coil, again, I just love the aesthetics on this card. I think it's great. Just the words Conjure Mortal Coil are, like, it's very cool to see on the card. You could explain this very easily using pre-existing Hearthstone words, basically. So, like, what does this keyword really add? Like, maybe some here and there edge cases with spell damage?
Yeah, and I'm not even sure if the edge cases should be as they're written. Like, I think, like, we already have cards that cast spells. Like, we have Yogg-Saron and cards like that.
Yeah,
or
so I don't
minions
know if
cast
those
spells.
Cards...
Yeah, and they work a little differently. Like, the fact that that this can't go through taunt, the fact that this scales with spell damage, whereas I'm pretty sure the ones from... Do the ones from Yogg-Saron scale with spell damage? I don't think they do.
I'm pretty sure they do.
Oh, they do?
Yeah.
Alright, well... But, yeah, so I don't know if this works the same as, like spells that are casted through spellcasting minions, but you could definitely explain it with existing words. But, I mean, most keywords can already be explained with existing words.
That's
like,
true. That is true.
Echo can be explained with repeatable this turn, as we see from Unstable Evolution. So it's more of saying, like, this keyword, like, when you make something a keyword, you're not saying, like, this is an effect so complicated we need a bolded word that does something special. It's like you're saying this is something that's interesting enough to be, like, the core of a set, and the boldedness tells you that, like, this is something which a set is going to revolve around.
Yeah, I think this mechanic is very tricky because obviously it's inherently slow because it triggers on attacking, and like it's not reliable in Hearthstone where minions constantly have battle cries and don't last a turn. But also the fact that most of its synergies are very niche and come from like interactions with the keyword itself and casting spells. Like Hateful Prisoner, for example, the card we just reviewed, it's basically a Boulder Fist Ogre with Dragon synergy. The keyword does very minor changes, gives it immune while attacking, kind of. But Vile Defiler, I mean, we've seen Tainted Zealot see play in Warlock with Defile. This will probably do more with Defile than it would with the actual Mortal Coil ability. So it feels really awkward to use.
Yeah, I think Conjure is... It's a pretty decent keyword as like a one-off or couple-off showcase for custom cards. I don't think that Blizzard could make 14 cards out of it for set. And, this may not be common knowledge, but like typically Blizzard will choose one keyword as their set keyword. They will flavor the name of the keyword and effect of the keyword to the expansion and make about 14 cards with it. So we saw this with Echo. It has like the kind of like ghostly feel. Adapt with Ungoro, Recruit with KNC. I just don't see 14 interesting cards with this mechanic.
Yeah, I
14
think
cards
that
snowbally.
Even if you could make 14 like interesting, different Conjure cards, like there are clearly some interesting things you can do with like Rush and Wind Fury, etc. But it just, I don't think that it doesn't really give you any decisions in a sort of sense. It's like a static keyword. It just says like this minion works this way. It doesn't open up decisions or really that many new synergies, and for that reason I don't think it works very well as something for a set to revolve around. So you'd be forced to kind of just throw this in as an evergreen keyword like Rush, but then I don't know, it feels too complicated for the sort of static gameplay it provides in a sense.
I agree. So moving on to the next keyword, we have Warp, which is made by trueaesthete, and it is do X instead of drawing cards. So our example card is a 2-mana 2/3 Mage Common, Spinner of Leylines. Warp, add a random Mage spell to your hand. And an important clarification for the Warp mechanic is if you have several Warp minions on board and you draw one card, all Warp effects will trigger. The draw will of course be cancelled, but you will get all your effects, which is cool.
So immediately the first thing that jumps out and worries me about the Warp mechanic is that drawing and top decking cards is one of the quintessential like fun like excitement climactic moments in Hearthstone when you're like, you don't like, it's sort of the typical variable payout gambling situation where you're hoping for a certain card, or you're hoping to get anything but one card. And that randomness, like sometimes people think it's unhealthy, but it does produce a lot of exciting moments. And so a mechanic which inherently stops you from drawing cards, stops you from seeing new things in your deck, stops you from having this like fun moment of top decking. Even if that mechanic itself is fun, like I'm skeptical that you can sort of make it worth the moment that you're taking away.
Yeah, this card in particular, though, doesn't feel like it hurts too much in that aspect, because you still get a card from a random pool, whether it's your deck or just the mage spells in the rotation you're playing.
That's true.
Yeah, the next card we'll look at is a bit different. I think this card does like a decent job at, trying to bridge the gap of like the lost fun tension that you get from like, and it's not, you said Hearthstone, but it's not even Hearthstone. Like decks being random is a feature of card games, and it's like really important to card games as a whole. I don't think that maybe there's room for 14 interesting, like replace a draw with a random thing. I think there's a lot of really other interesting effects you could do, which we'll look at in a sec. But then you're starting to get into territory of like removing the whole card game part. So that's an interesting thing to consider.
Yeah, I think just from playing card games in general, when you sort of have a bad hand, you kind of, which is pretty often, you're sort of always looking forward to next turn where you're like, I want to see something new. I want to have like a chance to kind of like do things. But whenever you have something that sort of like locks you out from drawing cards, and you're just stuck with the same static hand, you don't get to make any new decisions each turn, it can often just feel like you're just not really playing the game. You don't have anything to look forward to. And so that's definitely a concern with the warp mechanic. As for this card...
Yeah, go ahead.
For this card in particular, shifting a little bit off of the design of the warp mechanic, and onto like balance-wise, so Spinner of Leylines, like the upside is that I guess random mage spells will work towards your mage quest and trigger off of Leyline Manipulator. But other than that, like, I don't know, this card feels a bit weak. I think that like chosen mage cards are often a lot better than random mage cards. So just having a vanilla statted minion for like losing out on a draw, I'm not really sure.
That like this card is really good with Alanef.
Oh yeah, that is extremely true.
Yeah, I mean,
that's kind of concerning.
I'd use
That's pretty concerning with pretty much every mage warp card.
Yeah, I'd use it to delay my Flame Leviathan and build suspense. That's just me, though.
Yeah, I think, like, another... Not to rag on the mechanic too much, another kind of, like, unfortunate thing with the warp mechanic is that, like, Hearthstone is already not a game really built for fatigue matchups. Like, long games in Hearthstone are really long and really grating, and so, like... If you're just trying to like delay drawing of your deck for the purpose of not trying to go to fatigue, I don't think that really makes for like super Hearthstone-y gameplay. Like for the case with Alaneth, obviously you're reaching fatigue on turn 7 and 8, which is not normal. But if people started using warp cards just to delay their fatigue, I don't think that would be very interesting gameplay.
On the other hand, though, like I do think like one of the things I like about this mechanic is that sort of synergies on drawing cards is relatively unexplored. Like one of the few cards that does so is Curio Collector. And I think, setting up situations where like you have some warp cards, maybe even 2 warp cards on the board, and you play like one of your huge card draw engines, and you get like a bunch of procs on this ability that normally only happens once per turn. Like I think there's a very good dynamic between the fact that you'll always get warp once per turn, but you have the potential to get it many more times per turn. And it establishes like very good lower bounds on the mechanic and upper bounds on the mechanic. So I like that a lot.
Especially since card draw in Hearthstone is like fairly expensive, and it's just like... You're going to be getting very powerful effects with warp, and it's definitely a decision the player has to make. Like, do I play this and hope I get the start of my turn draw? Do I use my draw spell right now to get my effect? I think there's a lot of like interesting gameplay with this mechanic.
Alright, well our next card is Shadow Weaver, a priest epic minion, 5 mana 2/5, battlecry, choose a minion, warp, summon a 1/1 copy of that minion. This is a more complicated use of the keyword.
Yeah, so the important thing to note is that, like we said, this warp effect does not generate card advantage, so you're not really getting any tension with this specific effect.
Yeah, you're losing sort of the top deck tension. What you are getting, though, is potentially some pretty insane combo potential. Obviously, this card costs 5 mana, and Priest doesn't have the best of card draw engines.
They do have like one of the best cantrips in the game, so...
Power Word Shield, like sort of... Well, I mean, if you have a large minion that survived through the turn, then you've probably already won. But if you can sort of get this on any minion with a valuable effect and just double power word shield, that's pretty insane. Although, actually for a 5-mana 2/5, 3-card combo, that's not super terrifying. So I think definitely my first impression of like this card is scary. Like potentially being able to summon multiple 1/1 copies of something in Priest of all classes is terrifying. But yeah, I think this card, the creator definitely is aware of the potential and put it at 5 mana accordingly.
I mean, it's kind of like Mirage Caller and Twilight's.
Yeah, but I think the difference between 3 and 5 is quite a bit in Priest with cards like Velen costing 7. So yeah, 5 sort of like restricts you exponentially more than a 3-cost duplicator would be.
One thing I kind of like on this card, it might be minor, but the text box looks really nice, and I think it's kind of rare that we have 2 keywords on a card, especially ones that are so different, like an on-play and an on-draw. And I think this card like matches Battlecry with Warp very nicely.
Yeah, it's very pleasing.
Yeah, I think like this is something you always want to watch out for these like sort of double keyword cards like Moat Lurker, things like that. When you sort of have one keyword on the first line and then a second keyword kind of sandwiched in the middle, the card can feel clunky and awkward. But I think because of and I think I might be wrong, but it looks like that text was intentionally shrunk by maybe 2 or 3 font sizes, and like I think that's really good
that's
decision.
a pro tip, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I noticed about the warp mechanic is that not so much Spinner of Leylines because you still get card advantage, but in cards like Shadow Weaver where you lose card advantage for the effect, when you're facing a Mill Rogue, which is typically a not very interactive matchup, you have more things to think about, because if they're trying to mill you and you have a warp minion down, you're not going to be getting card advantage, you're going to be getting something else. So
yeah, I have a feeling that tech would never come into play very often, but it is something to note. It is definitely something to note.
Yeah, I think sort of fatigue and mill matchups are for balance purposes are essentially always treated as edge cases. I think there are plenty of cards that, or not plenty, but like there are a decent number of cards that will like significantly delay fatigue, or some cards can completely eliminate it, like Jade Idol or Dead Man's Hand. But I think like usually that aspect doesn't play into the actual cost of the card. It's just sort of like an extra benefit that you get, and because it's an edge case, it doesn't really matter. So I don't think we should focus on like fatigue or Mill Rogue matchups with the warp mechanic unless warp like brings them into the limelight specifically.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we want to talk about the new keyword then?
Sure.
Or thoughts on warp? We kind of talked about it like as we went through. I think this could definitely have 14 interesting cards. Whether those cards would have interesting gameplay is another question.
Yeah, I think making a set, with regards to making a set entirely around warp, contrary to Conjure, because warp has this distinct synergy with card draw options, there's a lot more opportunities to create an interesting set around warp, and giving each class sort of very specific card draw options. The only concern would be, classes that are intentionally not meant to have card draw can't really be given interesting warp synergy. And maybe the set would
Warlock with card draw hero power has kind of really good options. So
as a result, you might kind of end up with like sort of a flood. If you wanted to make a really cool warp set, you might end up with like a flood of card draw, just sort of oversaturating it. That could be bad, but yeah, I think in terms of building a set, it could work.
One of the
go ahead.
Yeah, one of the Boomsday cards that was just revealed today actually was the 5-mana rogue spell that draws your entire deck. That would be really scary with warp cards.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, I think rogue is already scary with warp, but yeah, particularly if you have warp, like deal 1 damage to the enemy hero. Oof.
Speaking of Boomsday Project, the new keyword revealed. Magnetic. Play this to the left of a mech to fuse them together. So the mech that's like to the right will gain the stats and effect of the magnetic mech, basically. So their reveal card was Spider Bomb, a 3-mana 2/2 hunter rare mech with magnetic, and Death Rattle, destroy a random enemy minion.
All right, I'm gonna jump in first on this one
Go ahead.
because I want to say like I really like the magnetic mechanic. Sort of a project I was working on to the side that is probably going to be discontinued because of the release of Boomsday Project. I, like many other people, was making a sort of like science-based, bringing mechs back mechanic, and I gave a lot of thought to like how do I want to make mechs interesting again. And one of my first ideas was, I want some way where you can give new effects to your mechs. But sort of every implementation of this was very clunky. If you just had a bunch of cards that are like, give a minion at the end of your turn, do something or whatever. You have a bunch of quotation marks in your text boxes. There's no real like synergy behind this sort of thing. I couldn't come up with anything interesting there. But Magnetic, it just sort of like, it does exactly that. Like, mechs are robots. You can put new parts onto them. You can upgrade them. You can make them do new things. Magnetic lets you put the effects of one minion onto another minion. Has a bunch of dynamic synergy potentials. It really ties into mech identity perfectly. Like, I really love this mechanic. I think it is perfect for mechs. I think it's just really well done.
I guess you could say you're attracted to the keyword.
Oh my god.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I had to.
My first thoughts is just like, wow, this is like super elegant. It's a buff which can be played as a standalone minion, gives max identity. I was super impressed by this first card.
Yeah, I think, like, we've definitely seen mechanics before that have the potential to sort of have these like relatively complicated effects. And then we usually see them used for like simple things because Blizzard likes to keep it simple. Like, I think if you've seen sort of community created echo cards, you'll see that they're, for the most part, much more complicated than the existing echo effects in the game. And so I was initially worried when I heard about Magnetic that it's like, oh, it's just going to be like Magnetic Wind Fury, Magnetic Taunt, and not really do anything. But with this first card, we already see like they're willing to put Death Rattle Destroy an enemy minion on Magnetic. Like, they're willing to give entire full-fledged effects to Magnetic minions. And so there's going to be some like really interesting synergies with Magnetic that you're going to have to think about.
Yeah, so, and sorry, go ahead.
I like the magnetic mechanic. I mean, it's basically already been said, but mechs didn't really have much of an identity before besides doing random stuff, so they're kind of all over the place. But now with the one keyword, they can be still all over the place and doing a lot of random things, but they also have some kind of identity in the keyword, so I think it's really neat.
Now,
Yeah.
I want to ask a question about that, actually. You're sort of praising the magnetic mechanic for being limited to mechs only, and I mean, I think that's very interesting too. But what if I'm a player who just has a vendetta against mechs, and I'm excited for the new expansion, and they say, the new keyword can only be used with mechs, because magnetic does nothing if you don't have any mechs. And I'm really disappointed, because like, I basically, as a mech hater, I don't get anything that I want to play with this expansion. And I mean, obviously I don't think there are many people who just hate Mech Tribe, but like, there are people who, different people enjoy different types of decks, and there are probably people who won't enjoy any of the mech decks. It feels pretty bad that like, Magnetic literally can't do anything for them.
Yeah, I definitely think it could be a problem, but we've only seen 5 cards so far, so it depends how many magnetic cards and mechs they put into the set.
Yeah, so like, did Druid get any echo cards? I'm just curious.
I don't think so, no.
So like, here's the thing. I think the percentage of people who are going to dislike mechs is like less than the percentage of people who exclusively play Druid. And Druid didn't get any echo cards to play with.
Well, the thing is,
So
though,
that was
that
fine.
which would introduce 2 keywords. It introduced Rush and Echo, so it's kind of like,
true, but I mean,
and I'm
Rush is
pretty sure
hardly,
every
like,
class, every
Rush is
class got
hardly
some
an
speckling.
An exciting toy. And then the other thing to consider is that I think a lot of players play Arena, and especially with like tribal bonuses. I don't know if they still do that, but like, you're probably going to be able to play with some mechs if you wanted to. So.
Yeah, I mean, luckily, like, the magnetic minions aren't worthless on their own, so in Arena, like, you can still pick them, and I think they're probably fine. Like, Spider Bomb might be okay in Arena, I don't know.
I think it's
don't
a
really
pretty,
play that much
it
Arena.
seems like a good card, I don't know.
But it's, like, even if the card is okay in Arena, it just always feels kind of bad when you just have this entire aspect of the card that you know you'll never be able to leverage.
Yeah, that is an interesting thing to point out, I will say. And I think, like, kind of unrelated, but the first thing that I noticed when I was trying to design cards for this mechanic is that you'll kind of have a very, like, you'll often have, like, an off duality between, like, do I want to play this as a minion versus do I want to play this as a buff? So, like, obviously higher attack minions are typically skewed towards, like a 3-mana 4/2. You wouldn't want to play that very often, but, like, 3-mana give a minion +4/+2. You'd, like, always want to play that in a minion. That's a ton of free attack damage. I think there's, like, often you always want to buff so you can get the free attack damage immediately. So, like, I think this card does a pretty good job at, like, being able to be played on its own and as a buff, but I'm, like, interested in seeing how they tackle future magnetic cards and making sure there's, like, still a decision to be made.
Yeah, after seeing a lot of custom magnetic cards and making a couple, I kind of come to think of it as, like, a lot of the old GVG mech synergies where if you control a mech, do X. It's kind of like that. Your reward for having a mech already in play is going to be typically better. You'd want to play it as like
That's
it's a buff.
true.
It just feels like it's mostly going to be stronger in that regard. But I think designing a card that is like equally strong, playing it as a minion or magnetizing it would be very interesting.
And so what we did to explore the magnetic mechanic and have some interesting discussion is we each brought our own magnetic card to the table, and we'll see how this goes.
Yep, we're doing a little show and tell.
Yeah, we've briefly looked at each other's cards, but I haven't thought too much about each other's cards, so this will be interesting to see. So the first one up, Birb, why don't you introduce your own card?
Yep, so my card is first. My card is the Anima Fragment, which is a 2-mana 4/4 Warlock Epic Mech minion. It is magnetic, as per the design challenge, and it has the effect, at the end of each turn, destroy this minion if it's your only one. And so, playing off essentially what we were just talking about, of like, so I think magnetic as a keyword works fine if you always attach it to a mech, if you can. Like, if it's just always better to buff. Like, I think that's still okay. I think it's just, it works as like a reward for controlling a mech. But I still wanted to explore, like, what if there's a card, what if there's a magnetic card, which you have to really think about whether or not you want to attach it to a mech, even if you can do control a mech. And so I was thinking about various ways you could do that, and this is what I came up with. It brings back Anima Golem's effect from GVG on a much lower cost. And so sort of the way this works is you can potentially get a 2-mana 4/4 buff to a mech, which is very strong. You get some immediate value and insane tempo. But the issue is that if you do decide to attach this to a friendly minion, you sort of decrease your number of minions, and you make it much easier for your opponent to get this free kill on the minion you just attached it to with this minion's effect. So, even if you do control a mech, if you only control one mech, you obviously want to play this as a separate minion so that it doesn't die immediately. Or maybe you sort of want to use it as a 2-mana power overwhelming for your mech minions, which then pushes a mech zoo. So those are sort of my thoughts in designing this card, but, I was exploring a weird corner of the mechanics, so what do you guys think about it?
Yeah, I think you did a really good job just encapsulating a Warlock magnetic mech. Obviously, it calls back to Anima Golem, but this natural tension between you give it you use the magnetic buff, and now you've just lowered your possibilities. You could have just played it on its own, and you would have one more minion. But a 2-mana +4/+4 buff is really strong, and I think that's a really good tension between the two decisions that you've made with this card.
Yeah, I think this has a nice duality, not only in magnetic playing it on another mech or just by itself, but also you could build it it's most likely going to fit in some kind of zoo deck where you have a lot of minions on the board, but it doesn't have to necessarily be mech based. It's a really nice curve after Possessed Villager, for example.
Yeah, that's true.
And Haunted Creeper, a lot of other stuff can stick in Warlock.
Now, something I want to ask about is, Maysick, you said that you sort of liked the tension in this card. And my sort of question is, is tension a good thing? When this card's effect works against itself, doesn't that feel bad in a sense? Doesn't that feel like this card has anti-synergy and is just not doing what it should be? And, you want to be rewarded for using magnetic, you want to be rewarded for controlling a mech, but in the game just sort of...
These are two, very distinct design philosophies, which, are constantly in my head. And I'll use the new Omega cards as an example. So, one of the Omega cards was a 4-mana 2/6 taunt, and it says Battlecry. If you have 10 mana crystals, gain +6 attack. Am I correct? It was a mech. No, it's not a mech, but that's the new Omega card, right? And so, I saw some criticism of this mechanic on the Discord that there's not really a decision to be made here, and if you just want to wait to play the card to get the effect, and you feel bad whenever you have to play it before the effect. And I kind of agree, especially because once you get to 10 mana crystals, you're at 10 mana crystals. So you're just I just want to wait to play this card. I don't want this card in my hand. It's basically a 10 mana card that gets me 6 mana crystals when I play it. That's almost how it feels. And obviously that was kind of a different card than the one we're talking about right now. But I think this is a bit different because you always have the decision, and it's always dynamic based on board state. So it's not there is a point in which I'll only play Anima Fragment as one of the options and one as the other. You constantly have the decision. I mean, assuming you have a mech on board. And I think both options are going to be good. So I think generally the player isn't too upset.
Yeah, I think sort of along that line, you can kind of think of keywords or mechanics in two classes. You have conditioned reward mechanics. That could be if you're holding a dragon, do something, where it's a condition, so it doesn't always happen, but it 100% of the time gives you something good. And then you sort of have just like decision mechanics. So this would be like choose one or echo or things like that, which like aren't necessary, where one case isn't necessarily strictly better than the other. It's sort of more enforcing a decision. It seems like based on the way Magnetic is currently designed, it is more of a reward mechanic. It's a reward mechanic for controlling a mech. It's not about the decision whether or not you attach it. But this card is definitely using Magnetic as a decision mechanic.
I think that the implications for Magnetic as a decision mechanic are like pretty decent. Though I do agree that like it's generally a reward mechanic, and I think like it's definitely a gradient. So the dragon one, you still have gameplay like moment to moment decisions on do I want to play this dragon because maybe I won't be able to trigger my synergy cards. There is still like, you know, each mechanic has some level of like decision versus reward. Yeah. But I do agree that this is Magnetic is mostly a reward mechanic.
Okay, with that, do we want to move on to the next Magnetic card?
So the next Magnetic card is mine. It is Strange Attractor. It's a 3-mana 2/2 neutral epic mech with Death Rattle. Return this to your hand with Magnetic. So we did not talk about each other's cards when we were coming in here, and so I predicted someone would bring a card that was just like a simple keyword or a simple effect with Magnetic, kind of like Spider Bomb, and I didn't want to do that for no reason really. I just wanted to bring like the craziest card I could think of. So I brought this Strange Attractor. It's a very strange card, and you have to kind of like wrap your head around it. So you play it your first time, and it does nothing. It returns to your hand with Magnetic. You can fuse it onto another friendly minion, and then once that mech dies, like let's say Anti-Killbot, or what's like a base mech warper. Now you'll have like a 2-mana 2/3 mech warper with Magnetic in your hand. It won't have the Death Rattle, but you can get any mech with Magnetic using this thing.
Yeah, okay. First of all, I think that this card should be at least a legendary. And I say at least because I think, like, even legendary is like, this card does so, like, has so many sort of game-bending interactions. This is, like, one of the most high-end legendaries. Like, this is sort of, like, in my opinion, this is, like, Deathstalker Rexar level of, like, complicated interactions.
Shutterwalk's probably, like, the most complicated interaction card.
Yeah, and I think, like, this is definitely cool. I like the idea of sort of snowballing this giant like ball of junk, so to speak, and just keep like just rolling this huge ball of like amalgamated mechs. But there's definitely like sort of one of the benefits we have of Magnetic is that it is restricted to mechs, and this makes it significantly safer as a mechanic. If you could put any minions effect on any other minions effect, Hearthstone would shatter in an instant. But even like the fact that this can give any mech Magnetic, like any stack of mechs Magnetic, I'm still worried that like somewhere, somehow you have infinite damage.
Well, it's worth noting that like it won't have the once you get a mech with Magnetic, it won't have the Death Rattle. So it ends up being kind of a stack, but not like a super big stack.
Oh.
Yeah. Because I assume Magnetic are applied as enchantments on top. So like if you give like if you're playing Shaman and you give a Flame Elemental +2/+2 with Earth and Might, and then Spirit Echo it back to your hand, it'll just be a normal Flame Elemental. The only difference with this card is that it will give it Magnetic.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
So I think I think what most of what you said is pretty true. Is that it can get pretty crazy, like being able to make any mech a Magnetic mech that can be played as a buff spell. Though it doesn't go like infinite generally.
I mean, something to note is that from the single sort of card we've seen so far, like I worry that if you're able to give kind of vanilla statted minions, like if you make those into Magnetic, you can have some like worrisome burst damage. Like if Anima Golem is suddenly Magnetic and it's also an 11/11 or something, and then you suddenly have like 6 mana, kill your opponent. Like that's kind of scary.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason why I didn't even give this Magnetic to begin with. So you need to play a 3-mana 2/2.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I will say this is like a super not good like intro to Magnetic, but I wanted to bring something crazy to the table. So
yeah, honestly, I looked at this at first and I didn't even really comprehend what it could do. I thought it was just Tentacle for Arms #2, where it would just go back to your hand. You couldn't really do much with it. But honestly, now that I understand what it could actually do, I love it. I think it's slightly complicated, but in gameplay, I think it'll feel kind of natural that, you know, you'll just get stuff back to your hand, you can play it again. Kind of feels like you're just taking a bunch of Lego bricks and breaking them apart, putting them back together a little different, and I think that's a really fun thing to play around with.
Yeah, I will say, like, I do agree this deserves to be legendary. The art and name, I just couldn't pass it up. It's too good.
Yeah.
So, Scorp,
Oh,
do you want to do your
yes,
card
I
now?
would love to. All right, my card is 4 mana, 1/3 neutral epic mech artificial swarmer. It has magnetic, and at the end of your turn, summons a copy of this. When I was designing this, I was trying to have a duality, like I said, where it's not always the most beneficial option to play it on another minion. I don't know if in the end I succeeded in that, but I tried to make it slightly attractive to just play it alone, because in this case, if you play it alone, you get, by the end of your turn, you'll have 2 1/3s that have the threat of copying themselves.
My first concern, it just seems insanely strong.
Yeah, that could be it too. But if you play it on another mech, you won't have as much generation, but you'll be generating something probably more scary.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
So you can either have two
Wait,
smaller.
no, you'll have the same amount of generation, right?
Well,
Yeah.
if you play it by itself, you'll have 2 minions that will
Wait,
generate.
so is this like echoing ooze, where like if you play this on a mech, and then it copies that mech, does it summon a base copy of that mech, or like a copy of that mech with the? Okay, so that mech won't have the swarmer on it, or will it?
Yeah, it should, because it should have the buff.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it should be
Echoing
then
Ooze-
okay,
yeah.
if it does keep the magnetic buff, if you attach it to another minion, then it seems like it's just always better to attach this, because like it'll multiply at the same rate.
Which is fine, like we said. Like
but like if Scorp was saying that his goal with this card was to create something where there was sort of a choice behind the magnetic,
that's true.
If the summoned copy of the mech didn't maintain the buff, then it sort of becomes a generator of like producing 1 mech per turn. Whereas playing it on its own, it can like double 2, 4, and so you have like sort of 2 different game plan options.
Yeah.
From the 2 different.
I mean,
so I think that could be interesting.
I was trying to get the 2, like as you said, it generates 1 mech per turn if you attach it to something, and that mech's probably pretty good, especially since it has the buff. But playing it alone, you'll get 2 mech generators, and that will double if they survive the next turn.
So that's what you intended.
And also, I think in a magnetic deck, what you're looking for is a lot of small mechs that stick to the board, so you can just throw the magnetic minions from your hand down freely wherever you want.
Yeah, that is true.
One thing we'll have to take note of, as more Boomsday Project cards are revealed, is if they're going to keep mechs as like an aggro archetype, there really weren't solid mid-range mech options from what I remember. Like, generally, there was a couple big ones, but it was all like aggro decks, mostly due to Mech Warper being such an insane card. I think this card is reasonable in an aggro deck, like power level wise. I think it's strong, a really strong card right now as is. I think if mechs get mid-range options, I think this could be like really dangerous. Just like from a steamroll perspective.
Yeah, I mean something that's, if you see kind of a magnetic card with a significant difference between the mana cost and the space stats, like I think that can sometimes be a worrying indicator that like the effect you're attaching is very strong, and then being able to use that effect immediately on the minion that already has a body could be very dangerous. And especially when it's a dynamic effect like this. Like, I think something that pops into mind when making magnetic effects is the fact you can do stuff similar to hand buff, where you can challenge players to have a minion with certain attack. So you could have like,
that's interesting. Yeah.
And I think this card kind of works like in sort of a abstracted sense. It works the same way, where it's kind of like dynamic scaling of the reward of this card based on the size of the body you put it on. I think that's like an interesting effect to explore with magnetic, but it is just like, I feel like that just makes it overwhelmingly strong when you use it in the magnetic case. Like, even with the clarification that when attached, it'll only summon 1 mech per turn, whereas it doubles on its own. This card just seems just so much better attached to a mech, because two 1/3s for 4 mana. Like, Pantry Spider doesn't see play, and that's this for 3 mana. So, yeah, I don't think it's really feasible on its own.
Yeah, one thing I actually didn't realize is that Metal Tooth Leaper, the 1 hunter mech they got in GVG, could be pretty nuts with this kind of card. If you are able to generate a whole board of mechs, might be his time to shine.
It is interesting that Metal Tooth Leaper is like one of the kind of strongest mechs. Mech Hunter was never really.
It's definitely been like super noteworthy because of a couple brawls.
Yeah,
it's definitely a really forgivable card in my opinion, except for the existence of a couple brawls.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that just about wraps up episode 2 of this podcast. Thank you guys for your time listening. Thank you for your feedback in the past, and we look forward to hearing more of it in the future. Let us know if you think we improved it in this episode and what you want us to see next time. We are open to all sorts of suggestions.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
I think one thing we'd like to do in the future is like more community submitted stuff. Even though we made our own magnetics cards, that's mostly just because we wanted to get this episode out as quick as possible. But definitely send us cards however you wish. Reddit, Discord. Yeah.
Yeah. Feel free to talk to us on the Discord. It's a very friendly
sure.
place.
Yes, come talk to us, please.
I am a moderator of this Discord server, and I promise I will not ban you if you obey the rules. But you know.
Okay.
All right. See ya.
See ya.
Adios.